People's Church had contracted with Fred Campbell to serve as interim minister for a 2-year period to allow healing and adequate time for a search committee to find a new settled minister. Jan Park interviewed Fred in 2005 to hear his impression of developments at People's during those 2 years.
Fred, my memory of the condition of the church when you came is that we were completely demoralized. Is that the way you saw us?
Well, I arrived in August, and the church was just undergoing a split, with a few families pulling out to start the new church in Portage. And there had been 3 years of unhappiness with the previous minister. And so the board was fairly demoralized. And I remember Ann and I trying to find the church, and we drove by the church 3 times before we found a way to get into it. And what was the problem is that the trees out there on the road had grown up and were beautiful. But there was only one small driveway going through a wall of pines, and you couldn't see the building from the road. But we did take saws and cut all the branches up to 10 feet off the ground, so you could see the church from the road. And then that continued, of course, when we went into the auditorium, or the meeting room. I can still remember my daughter-in-law visiting, and she wondered whether you played basketball in it. It was showing its age, would be a good way to put it. And so I had to think about this a while, but it's where I learned to use paradox to bring change. And I began to tell you how well used and much loved this building and room was. Well, on about the 3rd week, in the middle of the coffee hour, with about 4 or 5 of you other ladies around, Jean asked me what I was telling you. And I said, "Do you really want to know?" And she said, "Yes, I do," in her inimitable way. And I said, "Well, the room needs to be cleaned thoroughly and redecorated." I pointed out that the walls had been painted a beautiful yellow 30 years ago, and now you could see dark shadows above all the plenums, and that the rug was torn, and that the stage was chipped and beat up, and that it was well used and much loved. But I thought that with a new minister coming in, that it would be nice to do something about that. And
you were telling us not on your account, because you were preparing us for a new person.
Yes, your major charge to me as an interim minister was to prepare the church for the next minister. And I judged my success as an interim by the success of my successor. And in this case, one of the issues was that the building needed attention. It had not really been paid attention to for many, many years. And so the board heard what I was saying and appointed an aesthetics committee. And the aesthetics committee took 2 years and had lots of hearings, so that by the time they came in with their proposal for what they wanted to do, everybody had had their say. And everybody knew that there were going to be no nitpicking about the proposal. You took the whole proposal. And the proposal was actually rather radical, because it included 8 windows, which the room had never had. It included completely redoing the ceiling with new lights, and it included putting a curved wall out from the wings and doubling the size of the foyer and integrating the foyer into the auditorium.
And in effect, bringing the sunshine in.
That's right.
And the open air.
It was part of my vision and understanding of worship that you go to church to be lifted up. And that room has a vertical dimension to it, but because the ceiling was so dark, with the huge black beams and no windows and no light, no natural light in this wonderful natural setting, it was rather depressing. And I sensed that, and some people did, and some other people didn't sense how depressing it had been until after we got the light in. And it is true that at some points of the year the sun comes in rather brightly, but that trade-off in values of going into the room and feeling that vertical lift that the room has And the light, I think, has made a huge difference in the way people experience what's going on whenever you use the room.
One of the positive things you did when you came was to lead us in various sessions on the four faiths. Can you describe these and what you hope to gain from them?
One of the other major dimensions of the ministry while I was here was over the previous 8 or 10 years, I had been developing a religious education course which had been nicknamed The Four Faiths with Fred. Unitarians have a problem that they know what they don't believe, but they don't know what they do believe. So I had created this course to enable people to learn to be able to say what they do believe. And so I preached on it, and then I got 100 people to sign up, and there were 75 people in attendance sessions. Four Faiths course is based upon two premises. Number one, that all theological language in English is defined in the dictionary in terms of Christianity. So that if you are not a real Christian, you cannot think theologically. So I had set out to create functional theological definitions of theological words so that we would have a language that we could talk about the theological issues. The other proposition is that over my years of ministry across the entire Midwest of the country, I had realized I was hearing four voices of faith, and only four. And by simplifying it to that level, it meant that people had to make some choices, and then we could push them enough so that they would know what they do believe if they were willing to identify with one of the voices. And they were humanist, naturalist, mystic, and theist. And when we ran the course with 75 people in the room all 8 sessions, it was a great surprise to everybody because they'd had 30 years of humanist ministers. And then when we had the Four Faiths, I simply defined the terms and then asked everybody to self-divide into the group where they thought they would feel comfortable. And we got, with 75 people in the room, we had about 15 humanists, about 12 theists, about 25 to 30 mystics, and all the rest were naturalists. And this division held up all 8 sessions. It meant that there was a theological diversity in the congregation. And because we were able to establish a common language with similar questions that all four faiths were having to answer, it meant that people were listening to each other in a way that they had not been listening before. And all four people in each of the faiths realized that they fit into the community. And that the community vision which I was working on is that all four faiths are part of the community. And the uniqueness of the People's Church is that here is a community where you can name that diversity and have everybody feel comfortable and not threatened by it. With the acceptance of the four faiths, those divisions and tensions seemed to disappear. And the congregation came back together. And by the time the aesthetics committee was about ready to give its final report and say, here's what we'd like to do, I began to have members of the congregation coming into the office and telling me that they were already willing to donate toward the refurbishing of the building. The first person that came in with a little brown envelope just before Christmas. And he said, Fred, can you help me with this? The administrator's gone. I said, sure, what is it? He said, well, it's a gift for the building committee fund. And I said, laughed. I said, we don't have one yet. He said, but you will. And so it turned out to be 500 shares of Safeway Incorporated worth $20,000. And so the next Sunday I went into the service, I announced that I know that this congregation doesn't have a tradition of recognizing angels. But we have one, at least in this congregation, who's just given $20,000 to the non-existent building fund. And during that coffee hour, one of the other members stopped me and said, I've been thinking about the same thing, and I'll commit myself to $10,000. And so the second week, I made a second announcement about the angels. And 2 weeks later, another couple came up and said, we've decided we'll give $6,000. And by this time, everybody was beginning to wonder who it is because they all had said this is anonymous. And I had told the president and the treasurer, and that was it, so that I was not the only one, the keeper of this information. And but the people began to wonder, who is it, and could I be giving so generously? And so that by the time I left in the last 6 months, there was over $55,000 pledged to the program of redoing the church. And then when the final vote came on the redoing of the building, the board learned a month ahead of the final vote that it was going to be $100,000 more than the church had raised. Now this is told to me by Pete Peterson, because I was gone. And he said it took the congregation 10 minutes to commit itself to go for the full package of the redecoration and fund it, knowing that they were committing to an extra unexpected $100,000. And it seemed to me that this is a symptom of a congregation with a lot of esprit de corps and commitment, which has always been there, these people to People's Church. And by the time your new minister came, not only had the sanctuary and the worship hall been redecorated, but the foyer had been redone, and all the RE rooms had also been redecorated. And within 2 years, they also took care of the kitchen with a special project. So that then Jill, your current minister, came into a totally refurbished building, which is a symbol of the congregation's commitment and joy of being itself and moving into the future.
One of the terms you frequently used was transcendence. What did you mean by this, and what purpose were you getting at?
Transcendence is part of the four faiths, and I'll be playing with that tomorrow morning in my sermon. But the whole idea is that the purpose of religion is to sustain the meaning of our lives, and the meaning of our lives comes from our ability to reach to the transcendent, that which is larger than ourselves, to realms of existence that we recognize. And from those realms of transcendence, we draw the values of our daily lives. There's the human community, the natural world, the mystic experience, and God are the four that define the four faiths. And because of our genetics and our schooling and all kinds of other things, some people have never experienced God and don't know what that would be. Some people are incapable of experiencing a mystic experience. And so we just have different capacities of experience and of transcendence. It's sort of like we all have different capacities to enjoy music. Some people like classical, and some people like opera, and some people like jazz, and some people like country and western and rock, believe it or not, and some people like hip-hop. And this is a different capacity, and theology is the same way. We have different capacities to be able to enjoy the reality that's there.
Well, I think you were just what we needed at the time. We had lost so much.
Yeah.
And
Pete talked to me before he came, and we have a great friendship and respect for each other. And he understood what I had started and realized what he needed to finish, so that the 3 years of interim work was a unit. And he did. While he was here, while I was here, we didn't get the building done. But by the summer after he left, before Jill came, the building was completed. And the other dimensions of what we were working on also came to fruition, and you were ready for Jill. It also gave her space to be herself, because you'd had two very different ministers, and you had to learn that the minister isn't everything, that the congregation has to complement the strengths of the minister. And it was a great congregation. One of the greatness of the congregation is that I always thought most people thought of the 3 years before I came of the unhappiness. But I always thought about it as the strength of the congregation and the commitment of the congregation that worked on that problem for 3 years. And our job was to build People's Church back to the dynamic, forceful institution that it had always been in the Kalamazoo area.
while you were here also, I think for the first time in several years, we felt ministered to. And I'm sure that was deliberate and something that we really needed.
Yeah.
previous time?
Yeah, some people will say I'm not as good a pastor as some other people, but I always think that being a pastor and being interested in people and making parish calls and hospital calls is one of the dimensions of the ministry. Now, it is very true that as an interim, I realized that there was one element of the ministry that I could not do, and that was community activity and outreach. The job that we faced in those 2 years was to re-strengthen the internal institution so that it had a dynamism which would then generate the energy to reach out into the community. When I came back and realized that one of the ideas that was in the plans that had not been executed was the steps up to the stage in the sanctuary. And I realized that they weren't going to get built unless I built them, so I built them. And then just for fun, because I knew how to do it, I built the flower stands as a gift to everybody and to say, gosh, I really had a good time here too.
Unfortunately, at the end of Fred's tenure, the committee learned that the minister they had chosen and invited for a candidating week had accepted the invitation of another church. So it was back to the drawing board for the search committee, and the church contracted with Orrin Peterson to be our new interim minister. That year of Orrin's ministry featured the building renovations that had been planned over the last 2 years, and for a few Sundays in the spring of 1998, the congregation met at the Temple of B'nai Israel. Orrin, whose first 21-year career had been as a U.S. Navy carrier pilot, had a very outgoing personality. He increased the interaction of the children's moment, stimulated the founding of the men's discussion group, cheered on the softball team, and instituted a monthly ministers' lunch with seniors. Members gave credo statements on 8 third Sundays. The forum featured programs on Islam, Buddhism, and the pagan path. That year, as well as participation in community projects, People's Church helped Casa Amparo, a girls' school and shelter in Mexico. In April of 1998, the committee had eagerly agreed upon an invitation to Jill McAllister to come to Kalamazoo for a candidating week, after which the congregation voted 144-1 to ask her to be our new settled minister. She accepted and is now in her 7th year.
There was an overwhelming desire on the part of many people in the congregation to follow up our renovation of other parts of the church with a renovated kitchen. And so we convened a committee to start work on that. And we had a $10,000 startup challenge to go forward with the plan. And so we formed a committee, and we couldn't find a chair. So I agreed to facilitate the meetings and write up the minutes. And from then on, it was such a perfect committee that each person did their own thing. They could see what needed to be done, and people said, I'll do this, and it just was a perfect committee. It just worked beautifully.
The board said, I'm sorry, there is no money. If you want to do this, you have to raise the money. And so we did that too. We started out with a wonderful gift of $10,000 that was given anonymously, which was about a quarter of what we needed. And the congregation really caught fire and was very enthusiastic. Jean Bright got up in church one day and said, you know, I have cooked in this kitchen for 40 years now, 30 years now, and before I die, I want to cook in a nice kitchen. And so we need a little more money. And by golly, the money just came pouring in. And as it turned out, in the end, we had money left over, and we, the committee, cooked a dinner, a celebratory dinner to open the kitchen for the whole congregation. with the leftover money?
I guess I'm amazed at how fortunate we were that nothing terribly wrong went wrong. Usually you can take a chance for a couple of things, but when you have, say, 5 or 6 things that could go wrong, at least one of them usually does go wrong. But I think we were very fortunate that everything seemed to fall in place, and I happened on Wagner Electric, who came in and instead of charging $4,200, I believe it was, to run a separate power supply line for the new dishwasher, he pulled a larger wire through the existing tubing, and I think he charged us $1,100 for all the work he did on the new electrical supply for the dishwasher and the all of the outlets, including the 2 outlets for the island. Wagner Electric is still with us to this day. In fact, I'm going to see him next Monday.
Everybody had different little pieces that seemed to work, but the thing that yes, we had all these cupboards and we would put stuff in it. Well, even when you close the cupboard door, you can't see anything. You don't know where anything is. So you have to mark the cupboards like in a library. I want to find out where the aprons are. So I look here. Ah, the aprons are in S3. So you have to find A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you see, oh, S. That's at the end of this island, and everything in this orientation is in the S. You start counting from the bottom, 1, 2, 3. It says that aprons are in drawer S3. So I open S3, and lo and behold, what do you find? You find aprons. But I do want you to look at those vent covers. They're beautiful.
Welcome to the People's Church kitchen. This has been a labor of love for me because I've worked in the kitchen since I was a little girl with my friends Pat Pratt, Diane Warden, and Marge Spradling. We decided to take a different look and orientation when we decided to furnish the new kitchen. We wanted to be true to our Unitarian principles about preserving the earth, thus we have flatware and washable dishes. For the coffee service, we use free trade, shade-grown coffee, a program that's co-sponsored by many Unitarian churches across this country. One of the great features about our kitchen is the new commercial dishwasher, which washes a huge stack of dishes in 3 minutes.
My name is Rochelle Habeck Hunt, and I have the pleasure of interviewing our current minister, Jill McAllister, for part of our series on the history of People's Church. And so I'm going to turn my back to you and turn toward Jill and see if we can talk about some of the important themes of your ministry with us. So I was curious to hear you reflect back and think about what drew you here, Jill. You were a person with, we understood from your mentors, tremendous promise and all sorts of options and future. And here we are in Kalamazoo, and we felt pretty lucky that you chose to come here. And I'm curious to hear you talk about what drew you here and what did that mean in terms of your ministry and what you saw for yourself.
Well, thank you for the kind words about my potential. That's always an interesting thing to think of. In the search process to choose a church to come to, it was a quite daunting process, in fact. But I remember very clearly feeling an ease with the people from Kalamazoo, even over the phone. It was just different than a lot of the other churches I was talking to. And when I came here, well, it was April, and it was beautiful that year, and the daffodils were blooming, and I thought, what a wonderful place, and no one told me that it snowed in May sometimes, but it was really the people that I talked to that made a difference And they had such a clear sense of what they needed, and they were coming out of some conflicted years, which was very difficult. I had come from a church that had gone through this kind of conflict too, because these conflicts were quite common in UU congregations 10 years ago. It was a shift in our movement. And but the people here were quite clear about wanting to move on and move ahead and move in new directions. And I had a sense that the direction I wanted to move in and the direction that People's Church wanted to move in were very similar. The other thing that drew me here was the history of People's Church. And I have to admit that the part of the history which involved the women in ministry in the early parts of that movement of the prophetic sisterhood, Carolyn Bartlett Crane and some of the other women who were here, was very appealing to me. And I just loved that sense of coming to a place that had that kind of history, especially with women in the ministry that early. So those two things.
How did you think about your ministry as you came to People's Church?
As I came, I had a sense that some of the things I was called to do here involved ministering to families, teaching, the whole religious education aspect of the church, making the Sunday service be a little bit more inclusive of parts of worship in addition to the sermon, making the worship be a little more active and participatory and those kinds of things. Those are the things I remember. It's now been 7 years. I remember a year after I came having a conversation with members of the Religious Education Committee in which I said that I realized then, a year later, that the search committee had known what they were doing when they called me, because it was precisely these things that I was really interested in doing, that they wanted, and those were the areas that they wanted to move ahead in. And so I felt that match really gelled. Those areas, so the intergenerational life of the congregation, making sure we kept young children, young families, middle-aged and older people, and beginning to venture out into the arenas of what we call now social justice work. Oh, yes, we do that. And these are all the things that people from People's Church have done for, as long as there's been People's Church. So what I tried to begin to explain was that People's Church had been involved in social justice work, social action, since the beginning of People's Church. Even though there was a stated ideal that the church itself as a whole community didn't take a stand, but that you could go around to the social service agencies and the things in town that were doing a lot of good work, and you would see the names of people's people who had been there, building those places, giving them money. The idea was that only as individuals we did that work. So there was this story that we weren't involved in social justice, but that individuals did their work. And all I wanted to do was begin to say, but that makes us very involved in social justice, and people know the name of People's Church, and we need to lift that up and figure out what things we can do together. So I think that those were the main areas of moving forward, building on our history and moving into some new strength from these areas that we already had as part of the church life.
You used the term shared ministry when you came. We changed some things about how we evaluated the ministry, how we got input and how we were doing. Could you talk a little bit more about, what idea you were bringing with you, how you tried to move that idea forward, and perhaps where you see that now?
That is my ideal and my understanding of ministry, of the parish ministry, the role of a professional minister, shared ministry, and that describes the fact that every person who accepts the call to the religious life, who sees themselves as a religious person, is called to ministry, because in my definition, ministry is simply the being with others in ways that make a difference in their lives, in the life of the one ministering and in the life of the one receiving ministry, and it's always give and take. Ministry is an intention to hold up the highest values. Ministry isn't the skills necessarily of sitting by someone's bedside or preaching a sermon or doing church organization. All the members of the church have those varying skills. People can do those variously, and the one person who becomes a professional minister may or may not do those things well. But the role of the professional minister is to lift up for everyone in the community their own gifts and their own roles and what they're called to do in terms of being with others to help bring more love into the world, to heal the suffering of the world. I think that one of the reasons this is my ideal is that I've never been a professional minister without also being the mother of young children at home. And the ideals for ministry include, for traditionally, individual people who overwork, who stand out in front, who a community sees as the person who has an opinion about everything. And I have not seen myself as a person who was able to do that. My job is not to be the spokesperson and the one leader. My job is to do my part of the ministry. And since I'm not willing or even capable of doing 7 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day, which I know some of my mentors did, and it had terrible effects on their family life. My idea was that ministry, professional ministry, is my career, but it's not, I can't do it at the expense of the life of my family, nor do I want anyone to undertake their religious life at the expense of their other commitments. The religious life is to strengthen those commitments. And so shared ministry is my ideal of saying, I will do my parts of the ministry of the congregation, and I want to work with all the other members of the congregation who have their parts, because they have other expertise, they have other gifts, they have other ideas that I don't have.
Okay. I'm Deb Wickman, and I was the Director of Religious Education at People's Church from 1998 to 2001. And this is Diane Melvin, who succeeded me in 2001 to the present time, and she's still DRE. Jill McAllister and I were hired at about the same time, and in 1998, when Jill came that week in April of 98, she did a variety of meetings, and I went to one of those where I got to talk with her and hear her ideas on religious education and on ministry in a church like People's. And I was really excited by her ideas of shared ministry, of incorporating children and families into the life of the church, and in the religious education program being part of the whole church and not just something that kids did on Sundays when the adults were in the regular service. When Jill came, the end of that summer, I had already been working a little bit that summer, and we had talked on the phone a lot and had decided to go with a curriculum, a Pillars curriculum that she had helped develop back in Corvallis at her previous church, and she had written that curriculum with some other folks from her church. And what a Pillar curriculum does is takes, in this case, it took 4 different themes, and each theme was a year-long theme, and we would teach that theme to the whole RE program, K through adult, that year. And what we had done previously was other Unitarian liberal religious curriculums that were all great curriculums, but they weren't an overall theme, and different ages would be doing different things at different times. So in this Pillar curriculum, the first year is Unitarian Universalist principles and history, and you learn all about Unitarian Universalism. The second pillar, the second year, was peace and social justice, and we learn what it means to be UU and to be involved in peace and social justice issues, and what that has to say about how we live our lives. The third year, the third pillar, is world religions, where we study the building blocks of other world religions, and we kind of compare and contrast their similarities and differences. And I think what it does is help us develop some tolerance for other religions and some understanding. And then the fourth pillar is our Jewish Christian heritage, which we do for half a year, and then the second half of the year, it's our interdependent web, which we studied, and we have been doing those curriculums, back since 98 when I started as DRE. I also, when I was hired as DRE back in 98, it was a half-time position. That next year, with the help of a grant from Loretta, the Liberal Religious Educators Association, we were able to make the position 3/4 time, and then it was also 3/4 time that third year that I was DRE. After 3 years of being DRE, I had decided that I had loved the job. It was great, working in this capacity, but I was feeling some pulls about going back to being a social worker, and so decided to leave my position. And I did, at the end of that church year in '01, and at that point, Diane, you were hired and picked it up from there.
I started as the Director of Religious Education at People's Church in 2001, and I love the Pillar program that Jill and Deb had started, and so we've continued using that. It has worked really well. One of the highlights of that is having all the kids studying the same curriculum at the same time. Not all the kids, but even the adult education classes. So we've implemented a lot of intergenerational services since Jill has started that really incorporates all the children and the adults into one comprehensive service. And it's nice that we're all studying the same topic or the same theme throughout the course of the year, because then our intergenerational services reflect that. A true highlight is working shared ministry with Jill. She's fabulous to work with, and it's great to be able to work as a team to plan the services or to work together to plan the programs.
And not only working with Jill, but I think shared ministry implies working with other committees on the church, with the board, and it's truly a shared ministry in this church. It's not just Jill, it's not just the DRE or Director of Religious Education, it's just not the music people, it's the whole church working together.
It's a nice team.
Another thing that we started doing back in '98 was working with the Our Whole Lives curriculum, or OWL, which is a lifespan sexuality curriculum that the UUA published back in '98 in conjunction with the United Church of Christ. And that was replacing the old AYS sexuality curriculum that we had done at People's for a long time. And it was really exciting to be involved in this new curriculum. That fall, fall of '99, we had a training here for teachers who wanted to be trained to teach OWL from all over the state of Michigan. And we had a team from People's that got trained, and then we offered the OWL program for our middle schoolers, which was the foundation of the program, starting that January. So we went from January till June, till school got out. We had really good attendance. There were 12 to 16 middle schoolers regularly attending that class. My son was in it, and I know that he really got a lot out of it, and I was really proud that we were able to start doing that year.
I am also very pleased with the OWL program. Saying that it's Our Whole Lives Sexuality Education, we've expanded the program to now we offer the kindergarten first grade class, the 4th through 6th grade class, continuing with the middle school, which is the core of the program. We also offer high school OWL as well as an adult OWL class. My position was expanded a year ago from 3/4 time to full time. And at that time, the Director of Religious Education was over more than just elementary and high school age kids. It now is a lifespan program, and it also is in charge of the adult religious education program. We've expanded to a lot of new programs in the last couple of years, and one of these is our campus outreach. And we have a group of college students and young adults who meet at Western Michigan University every week that come from K College and surrounding colleges, and our church is very supportive of them. We also began a coming of age program last year for our 8th graders, which is an important kind of a rite of passage program for them. And then just this past June, we implemented our first ever People's Church Peace and Nature Camp, which was a day camp that drew in about 27 kids from the community and from People's Church to spend the week here on our beautiful grounds, immersed in learning about peace and respect for other people and for nature. So we've grown. Our programs have grown exponentially in the last few years.
And I think one of the reasons for that growth has been the commitment of People's Church to professional development for their staff and for DREs in particular. I know that when I was DRE, I was able to take advantage of going to conferences, going to General Assembly, meeting with other DREs, learning from them, so that I could bring this knowledge back to our program, to our church, and help improve and expand our programs. And it also helped my own, religious growth in that area. And I think it's a great thing for the DRE to be growing religiously because that's what you're trying to work with the kids to do.
It's very important. I too am very grateful for the professional development support that People's Church gives me in this role. I too have attended a lot of conferences, general assemblies, summer assemblies, and have learned a lot, met a lot of great people, and really grown spiritually and professionally. I'm very excited that I'm embarking on a new professional development opportunity. The Unitarian Universalist Association has just implemented a credentialing program for their directors of religious education, and I've just recently been accepted into the program and am embarking upon this journey to become a level credentialed DRE. I'll be taking some classes at Meadville Lombard Theological Institute in Chicago and assembling a portfolio of my experiences and reading a massive reading list, and I'm very excited and grateful to have the support from my congregation to be able to embark on this, and I'm confident that it will enhance our religious education program at People's Church immensely.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. I think there's been, as we've been talking, there's some themes that have kind of come forward here that I think have, been, highlighted in the last 7 years. I think the shared ministry between Jill and the DRE and then the congregation, it really truly is a shared ministry. I think the expansion and growth of our programs, and I think the support for continuing professionalism of all staff. It's
Really
been
important.
a good thing.
And it's really helped to expand our program. Our program has grown leaps and bounds. The number of children that we have that come through the door, the number of young families that we have, and when they see that support for religious education in our church, it makes them really want to come here. And that's the heart and soul of the growth and the future of our congregation. So I'm grateful to be in a position where I feel really supported by our church, by our minister, and have the opportunity to minister to all these families that come here. Thank you very much.